Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending from where you are joining to our Cloud Lunch and Learn session. Today we have a special guest. We have Mike. Hey, Mike, how are you doing?
Yeah, fine, and you?
Good, doing good. We are excited to have you back in the Cloud Lunch and Learn. And today,
Thank you.
actually, our conversation is going to be about infrastructure as a code. And some of you, as you may met Mike before, Mike is a Microsoft Azure MVP, and he has been in that infrastructure as a code space for a while. So he has some experience, bits, and tips of he's going to share today about Azure Bicep and the evolution over Azure ARM template. So it's going to be a very interesting session today. In addition to that, I would just say that here we have QCR code on the right side, which is provided by Microsoft. And as you may see, there's a URL, ak.ms, on the bottom in the yellow. So you can use that one to get the Microsoft Learn modules and to learn more about this infrastructure as a code solutions in Azure. And that said, I'm going to switch the gears here. Okay, please put your questions in the chat. You are more than welcome to do that. And then, and I see Ricardo. Can you hear us well? Audio? Mike, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, so it looks like Ricardo, everything should be fine. Let us know if you can hear us. If not, please, rejoin. I hope it will fix your issue. And that said, I'm going to bring the slide and Mike. So please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Owen. So, hi everyone, welcome to my session, the known and unknown features of Bicep, the evolution of Azure ARM. So, during this session, I will take you along the journey of what Bicep is and basically how it works and why you should use infrastructure as code basically on every platform you have. But first of all, let me do a more formal introduction of myself. So, I'm Mike van der Gaag. I'm technically responsible at a company called 350 in the Netherlands. I'm also a Microsoft certified trainer, and as Elhan also introduced, I'm a Microsoft Azure MVP, and I'm the founder of the Dutch Cloud Meetup. That's basically more or less the same type of group we have here in the Netherlands where we also discuss certain sessions and discussions. So basically, to go back into the subject as well. We all talk about infrastructure as code, but what really is infrastructure as code? Like this definition here on the screen, infrastructure as code is the management of infrastructure in a descriptive model using version control to store the files. So basically, what you see from this definition is that infrastructure as code is just more or less a file on your file system where you have your infrastructure defined in some kind of schema, some kind of contract model, that you place under version control, meaning that in every kind of way, you have a specific state of your infrastructure specified in a file, and you could have multiple versions of that infrastructure. So each change is specified in another file so that you have that specific version control over your infrastructure. You maybe are imagining for yourself, okay, but why do I need to specify my infrastructure in a file when I can just do clickety-click in the Azure portal? Yeah, you can, but there are more or less a lot of good things about infrastructure as code. Here we have six things that describe why you really should use infrastructure as code. So if we go down the list, basically, and see the first one is saving money. By specifying your infrastructure as code in a file, you can deliver environments very quickly without doing the clickety-click in the portal. So basically, you more or less you can save time as well if you have multiple environments. And if I have to deploy a VM once, yeah, you can do the manual way of going to the Azure portal, creating the VM. But if the next week I also have to deploy another VM, you have to do the exact same thing twice. If you have that specified as in infrastructure as code, it's very easy. You just push a button and the VM is there. The other thing is version control. You keep on getting specific versions of your infrastructure. If you do the manual option in the Azure portal, you will not have version control. You cannot see what has changed. So you have to go through the activity log and see basically what other people have been doing. With version control, you can directly go back to previous versions. You have a part of reusability, so you can reuse your templates and reuse them in more or less specific scenarios. It's repeatable, so you can repeat your deployments with your infrastructure as code. If you need one VM, you can deploy it once. You need two VMs, you can deploy it twice. You can just repeat everything you are doing. Another good thing is that we are seeing with large enterprise customers that in many organizations, they require strict rules on what to deploy and how to deploy it. And by just using the portal, creating a VM, then doing all the kind of manual configurations, doing network configuration and all, you will start forgetting things as well. So by using infrastructure as code, you can basically specify everything you need for a specific product, make sure that it complies to all the strict rules. You will not have the human errors by just forgetting a specific option. And you can repeat that for many services as well. What you also see is you do not see any more configuration drift. So if you have everything specified in file, you can change it there, and you will not have people doing configurations just on the fly within the portal. So all these things combined really makes you point to using infrastructure as code to have good environments, good stable environments, where you can also extend that environment very quickly. Sorry, I got a little bit of sore throat. So to continue, if you look at the Azure Platform has something called the Azure Resource Manager. That's basically also where ARM gets from. So you have the Azure Resource Manager that's basically specified here in the middle, and everything that authenticates with Azure and works with Azure talks through the Azure Resource Manager. So if you, for example, look at the CLI or the PowerShell that you use, or maybe a specific SDK, every communication through the Azure platform itself is done through the Azure Resource Manager. The same applies to the REST clients, and the same applies to the Azure portal. So basically, everything is talking Azure Resource Manager. So that's basically also why the infrastructure as code for Azure is called ARM templates. And in the ARM templates, you specify the infrastructure. So it's called an Azure Resource Manager template. And basically the resources itself are specified by the Azure resource providers that will basically deliver you the resources in the Azure platform. So why is this important? Because what I mentioned in this part is that everything in Azure talks to the Azure Resource Manager. So basically everything is communicating through ARM. So basically we say we have ARM templates. We still have ARM templates, but we now also have Bicep. So if we then look at what Bicep is, and really look at the definition. So Bicep is a domain-specific language, DSL language, that's specifically created to eliminate problems that you may have with ARM. And basically, if you look at Bicep, it is just a transparent abstraction over ARM. And also, because that transparent abstraction has a one-on-one capability of with ARM. So basically, you can do what you can do in Bicep, you can also do in ARM, and the other way around. And Bicep, I think more or less is now there for somewhat more over a year, and it also has Microsoft production support. So if you create Bicep templates and deploy them to the portal, you will have that production support. But to get back at why ARM is still important is that ARM is not going away, because we still have that Azure Resource Manager. That Azure Resource Manager talks ARM templates. So basically what Bicep does and what Bicep is it is the transparent abstraction. So you create a Bicep file, you compile that by using specific comments in the CLI that we will get back later on. And that basically creates ARM. And that ARM template is deployed to the Azure platform. They now created a lot of extensibilities and everything else in PowerShell that you will see later on as well to make it very easy for you, and basically removing that ARM layer as well. But that ARM layer itself will technically not be gone as well. So why would you then maybe make the choice to go over to Bicep instead of ARM? Bicep has a much simpler syntax than ARM. So like you will see in the upcoming demos, it's conciser to read. You do not have the commas and everything else laying around in your file, making it very concise and easy to read on what you are doing with your infrastructure and how you configure it. So the template will not be that large as what you had with ARM. Another good thing is that the thing you are deploying, so basically what you will be delivering to the Azure Resource Manager, is just one single file. So you will have one single file for deployment, but you still have a modularity component within Bicep, making you giving you options to create separate files for specific things and combining that all into one file. And everything I'm mentioning here will get much more clearer if we move through the session, where I have some specific and some epic demos for you as well. Just to give you a short difference for now is that on the left side you see a Bicep template, and on the right side you see exact the same thing but then an ARM. You can already see that on the left side we have 39 lines, and on the right side we already have more than 39 lines, and it's not even done. So making it very easy for you to read just in one go what we are deploying and what we are doing here. And it's just a simple template to deploy an app service together with the service plan to make sure that we have a running web app in the Azure platform. So to get started with Bicep and basically moving on and just going to do what we want to do, and it's basically create epic Bicep files, you will have to install the Bicep CLI. It is a CLI component. Now with the new versions, it's also included within PowerShell, within the CLI itself. But I like it more or less as a single installation on my workstation as well. And then you have, for example, 4 options. It's completely cross-platform, so you can use it in all platforms. And another good thing to install as well is basically the Bicep Visual Studio Code extension. The Bicep Visual Studio Code extension will help you creating the Bicep files you want and making sure that they are fully compatible on what you're doing. So like I mentioned before, there's full CLI and PowerShell integration. Of course, from a specific version of the CLI and of PowerShell. And basically what that brings is it brings the Bicep CLI itself into the specific modules or into the CLI, the Azure CLI, but it also gives you the option to deliver the Bicep files directly to the new AZ deployment commands you have in, for example, PowerShell. So you will see later on is that you have Bicep, you build Bicep, then you get ARM, then you can deploy the ARM, but you are also able to deploy the Bicep itself. So basically, like mentioned, the Bicep is an executable, and the executable only has 4 comments. So it now has the build comment, the decompile comment, the restore, and the publish. The restore and publish I will mention on later in the session because those are more or less related to the modularization of Bicep. But we will now go over to the build and decompile section. So let me just jump to Visual Studio Code. In this repository, I already have some demos prepared. I have some specific file structure I like to use. For your information, all this information I'm also showing is also on GitHub. The link is shared later on in the presentation. So if we just do a simple thing and just get started with Bicep. So I just create a new file. I call it storage.bicep. I will very easily and very quickly create a simple Bicep file. So what I start with is I start with typing resource, and I give that resource a specific reference name. Do not mind the gray overlines. Sometimes that's just GitHub Copilot that's trying to help me write good code. So what you
Hi,
can see already,
hi, Mike. Just quick thing, can you make it a bit bigger? It
yeah,
appears
of
very
course,
small
yeah,
for,
I totally forgot.
yeah, let's make it bigger. Thank you.
Oh, that's a lot bigger. I think this is much better. So already what you see happening is when I start typing, you already see the IDE helping me with choosing specific things. So I just type store and it thinks, okay, you want a storage account. I choose storage account. And it also delivers me the API versions of the web service itself so that you can use. So that this was more or less one of my pain points in ARM as well, just finding the good API versions to use for specific servers. With Bicep and the Bicep Visual Studio Code extension, it helps you getting that done and finding the good versions. I type, and what you can also do is just go on storage account, click on add required properties. So you see that the interface itself is helping you with everything you are doing, and also giving you the options of what you need to choose. So let me just type in these very quickly, just to let you show you something. And let me execute required properties, and let me do standard address. So in a matter of 20 to 30 seconds, I just created a storage account. I have a Bicep template that contains my storage account. So like I mentioned, you have the Bicep build and you have the Bicep decompile options. So for example, if I now in my command prompt just type Bicep and I do Bicep build and I point it to the storage.bicep file that you can see on the left side. If I now just press enter, Bicep will build my storage account into an ARM template. So what you see happening is that the sort.json file appears, and I now also have an ARM template. So I have a Bicep file and an ARM template. And this is basically what Bicep does. Bicep constructs ARM templates. So if I now scroll down to this template, I can see that I have a storage account with the exact same properties that I filled in as well. To give you another idea of the decompile option, and that's basically the other way around. So Bicep does building of Bicep templates to give you ARM templates, but it can also do the other way around. So for example, if you already got started with ARM, you already have a lot of ARM templates laying around, you can just deconstruct them into Bicep by using the decompile option. So let me just remove this one for the demonstration. So you can also see that happening. So what you can see here is I have a large template. I think about how many lines is it now? It's about 344 lines that contains an app service, Azure front door and everything else, all connected to one ARM template. I could just use the decompile option within Bicep to get a Bicep template from that. So if I do a Bicep decompile, let me just do the folder is decompile, and then it's called template.json. Press enter. Yeah, you will see some error warnings coming in, and that's basically just some specific hints on you to update your template. And then you see also a template.bicep file appearing, and opening that will give me a Bicep file that basically does the exact same thing as my ARM template, but then in Bicep. So this could really help you getting started with Bicep with your already existing templates. And what you can also see is that it's already a little bit shorter. There are still things in here that I would change, but it really gives you that head start of getting started with Bicep and seeing what you need to do and how you need to do it. So those were basically the first two comments. So you have that build and decompile to get you started and running your Bicep file. But then if we look at the Bicep file, more or less it's still the same as an ARM template. So we still have the parameter sections, we have the variables, we have the resources, but we now also have modules. So that's basically a new part. And we have the outputs. Later on in the session, we will get into the modules, but what you can really see is that it more or less has the same structure. But a good thing to notice that is you do not have to place the parameters on top of your file that you need to do with ARM. And the same with the variables that you all need to place in the same section. You can place them in the file where you want. So for example, if you really love the concept of saving your parameters together with your resource, you can place them on top of your resource, then create a new resource, and then save the parameters on top of that as well. And basically Bicep itself will make sure that the ARM template is constructed how it should. So basically these are more or less keywords that you really need to be aware of that you have in Bicep. So you have a param, you have a var for a variable, resource for a resource, a module for a module, and an output to specify an output. In those parameter sections, you can also do the same thing that you more or less could do already in ARM. You can specify specific attributes on it to really make constraints of your parameters. Really saying, okay, my integer parameter has a min and a max value, so everything needs to be placed in between of them, and also create subscriptions and use specific default values. So what you can see on top, for example, is that I have a parameter location of a type string that is resource group dot location. So we use the resource group function dot location, so we get the specific location of that resource group. Good to say as well is that you also have a metadata attribute, and you can place all kind of metadata in there that you want. So it's not a specific key value pair. No, you can place in all specific keys that you want, just to give enough information to the specific object. Another important concept in Bicep is called scoping. So we now have seen the files. What do I need to have in a file? And what do I need to have, for example, in the parameters? When doing a deployment, and basically it's the same with ARM, by default, you are always deploying to a resource group, meaning that in the ARM template, you specify what needs to go into my resource group and how is that constructed and connected together. That's the same thing with Bicep. Not supplying a scope will make sure that everything you do in your Bicep file is scoped to a specific resource group. By specifying a scope, so you can basically specify 4 scopes. You can specify tenant, management group, subscription, and resource group. When, for example, scoping it to a subscription, everything in your Bicep template will be scoped to a subscription, meaning that if you, for example, deploy a storage account, you also need to make sure that you scope that storage account to a specific resource group, but it also gives you the option of specifying multiple things in the same template and also specifying multiple resource groups. Let me just throw in an example as well for the scoping part. Let me get this one. So basically I have a Bicep template in here, and let me check. And what you can see here as well is that this Bicep template has a target scope subscription. So everything that's been built in here is scoped for a subscription and needs to be deployed somewhere specific. So what you can also see here is that on line 18 to 21, I created a resource group, and 23 to 26, basically the exact same thing, another resource group, but they are just named differently. So the one is called RG_name, and RG_name as a reference to the parameter, of course, and the other one is minus VNet, so that basically contains my VNet. And what this Bicep template does, it deploys multiple VMs, but what it does, it divides the VNet for the VMs with the specific resource group that the VMs will get. So we have 2 resource groups. And with that option, I can then, for example, scope my resources to a specific resource group. So I give my resource that I will deploy, in this example, it's a module that we will kick on later on, to a specific resource group. So basically when this part is deployed, it knows, okay, My scope is AppRG, and AppRG is the reference to this resource, and that's basically the resource group that is named with the parameter value. And with the VNet module, you can see that that is scoped to the AppRG VNet, meaning that it will be deployed to another resource group. So that basically brings us to the complete concept of the presentation. Bicep has a lot of known and unknown features, basically how to use it and when to use it. And we will just go over all of these polls we have here on the slide. So we already discussed some things like scoping, of course, but let's first dig deep into the IDE we have. So basically we have the IDE specified here, and we will go through some specific features that we have in the IDE that will really help you in creating awesome Bicep files all together. And that's basically all together with the extension of Bicep, of course, installed. So let's move back to the storage of Bicep file. And let me just remove this part. So this is your IDE. For now, the extension only is available for Visual Studio Code. There was a community call, I think it was a week ago, and they're also working on the Visual Studio part for Bicep, meaning that you also have some IDE capabilities in Visual Studio and not only in Visual Studio Code. So we have that IDE, and the IDE really helps you, but it also gives you another option. So what you can see here already is that I have a build Bicep file just included within my IDE. So if I click this, it will create the storage adjacent. So I already have it. So if we just remove it, I can just do a build Bicep file, and the Azure ARM template will appear. What it can also do, it can also open a Bicep visualizer. And this is basically a very good concept where you just get a visualizer over what you are doing with your Bicep file. So this is not a real exciting one. Let me just try the one that we decompiled a few seconds ago. So now more or less you get already some more information on what you have. So we have, for example, a front door application inside. We have a managed Kubernetes cluster, and we have some SQL resources. So this really helps you in constructing what you are doing within your Bicep and really looking back at, okay, what did I create? How does it look? What kind of resources are in here? And you can basically do that with every Bicep file you have. So now this is, for example, a VM. And the nice thing is in that template, I just moved to the visualizer. I also have an array of items. So you can also see that it has VMs, and that's basically a collection of VMs. So it really helps you in constructing your good templates and moving forward. Now let's go back to the storage of Bicep file and some other good things we have within the IDE. Also have this. So if I type in res, the IDE will help you in getting some snippets and as a part of scaffolding to get you started. So what I typed in res, and now maybe you already noticing that I already have AKS cluster, I have gateway WAF, inside alert rules. And basically, I can search for specific aliases. So if I search for web, I will get web aliases. So I can click on that, and I will just get started with having a web application or a website. So the same if I just type in AKS, I get an AKS cluster. So in a matter of seconds, I've got a Bicep template to deploy an AKS cluster without doing a lot of manual things and other references as well. So it's really easy for you to get started by using that scaffolding part. Another good thing is, and I will firstly move to the Azure portal just to show you something, is, for example, I have, let me check what's in this resource group. Okay, I have a Bicep registry in there. Let me just get the specific resource ID of this component. No, it not showing here. That's just terrible. And I always do this basically in this way. It's just a matter of convenience to make it very easy for myself, because I'm more or less lazy. So let me just create. I just created this. So basically, what I'm looking for is the complete resource ID of a specific resource, and I know that it's in the property section of a specific resource. So basically, what I'm looking for is basically this part, the resource ID, and that's basically pointing to your resource, of course. So if we copy this, and you say, okay, I want to start with Bicep, but I already have my resource in the Azure platform. I can do a right click. I can choose the option Insert Resource, and the IDE will ask me, okay, what's your resource ID? I paste in the resource ID I just extracted from the portal. I wait a few moments, do a little prayer, and then we will have the resource that I have in the portal specified within the Bicep template with the specific configurations I have done. So for example, in this example, my SSL configuration, my custom domain, everything is in here, and a lot more. And it's also basically the not that beautiful part around it is you get a lot of more properties in there as well. So more or less, I really do not like this, do not use this option. It's good to get started, but you will be removing other options as well, because a lot of these things will be in there by default. So you will be scraping things out as well. Looking at the slide, so you have discussed the ID, you have discussed the visualizer, we already did the decompile options, we already discussed the snippets, more or less the scaffolding. I've shown you the scaffolding, but I will show you it again and then just a little bit. Let me just do a matrix. So I'm basically specifying the resource, and you can see that what the IDE is telling me is that you have a specific resource declaration, but it's missing all kind of properties. Okay, I maybe know that I'm missing properties, but maybe you are starting to creating a resource where you do not know the properties from. This can really help you. And basically using the quick fix will scaffold all required properties. So I now know that I have to specify a location and a name as well. What you saw, and I did that very quickly with the storage account, it also delivers me the kind, the SKU, and all the intelligence around that. So basically going back to the feature that the IDE is really helping you in getting your work done and getting that done in a good way. To move to another part is basically the linter. So in Bicep, there are specific rules that you maybe need to obey. There are specific things that are basically best practices on how you need to move around Bicep. Some string interpolation things. In ARM, you saw a whole lot of functions used in concatenizing strings. In Bicep, they say, okay, you need to use string interpolation, some other best practices. That's basically why they created the linter. The linter helps you in specifying those things the right way, and also specifying things for example, what you can see in the things I generated, the property application ID is read-only. So remove it. You really do not use it. The property name is not allowed. So it really helps you in getting your specific Bicep templates in a good way and making it constructed. For example, in this part, it's saying, okay, we have a module, and the module has a parameter location, and you are not specifying. It should be best specified. That's the best practice. So it really helps you in getting it done. And it also has some quick fixes. The other way around is that you are also able to configure it. So what you can see now, I clicked on the light bulb and I can disable this specific lint direction for this line, or I can edit it in the bicep config.json. And that's basically also a new part. It isn't there for a, a long time already, but you can now make sure that you do specific things in bicep in a specific way. So you maybe already saw the file on this side as well. You have a bicep.config file, and in the bicep.config file, you specify a whole lot of things on how do I want to work with bicep. So we have a cloud part, and that's basically how bicep itself communicates to the cloud. So which kind of credentials do I need to use? So for example, what you can see here, my credential precedence is PowerShell. So I'm more of a PowerShell fan than a CLI. And my current profile is the Azure Cloud. But what you also see, and that's basically going back to the lint options, is the analyzers. And we have some rules enabled, and these are specifically all created in an error level. So for example, if I would go to this message, I would edit explicit in Bicep, and you can now see that the same variable is here, and I can also move it up to an error, for example. So if I just specify error on this side, and I would go to the same thing, you can now see that it's seeing it as an error and not more as a warning. So you can really specify your best practices in your team as well, really making sure that you all obey those rules and that you are not constructing your bicep files in the wrong way. So that's basically the linter. So we already did the linter as well. So we still have a lot of features to go. Let me just move on to, already showed linter. Let's move on to the bicep modules, because that's a real important one, and it will really start helping you creating those files you want in the way you want as well. So I think most of you may know is that when you were creating ARM templates, and your ARM templates were getting very large as well, because you needed to import a lot of services, need to import a lot of code as well. You start creating separate ARM templates. So we would have a separate ARM template for maybe for a web application, a separate template for VM. And to combine those, you would upload them to an anonymously available location, or for example, a storage account. And when deploying everything together, you would generate a SES token for your storage account, import that URL into your ARM template, and then deploy the whole thing. So that's basically a very annoying process to do with ARM, and I also did not like it. So I would all create everything into one file, and basically Bicep now eliminates that complete concept. So that's basically why in Bicep you now have modules, and a module is more or less just a Bicep file. So it's exactly the same as what I just showed you, but then more or less just called a module. And basically it's a contract to other files. So in a module, you would also have parameters that you can specify in a specific destination. And what you also need to be aware of is that when deploying your Bicep file that contains a module, you would have a nested deployment resource. So let me just show you that concept. What you can also see in my repository, I have a modules folder, and those are basically all Bicep files that I reuse in some location. So if you just go to the storage account of Bicep, I have a storage account where I specify two parameters. So I have a specific location and I have a specific name, and that's basically the name for my location. And I have an environment variable. And then I have a storage account. So this is basically specified as a module, but I can also use this module to deploy that storage account itself. And for example, if I would create a complete solution, so I'm creating a web application that saves files to a storage account, I can import this module. So what I would do then is basically I open Let me open up this file. Let me open this file. Just clear it. And I'm now not going to type resource. No, I will type module, and I will give a reference to my file. And what you already see the IDE doing, it's trying to reference you to a local location. So you can see the complete file structure here. So I select modules, and then I select the storage account module. Again, I type equals is, and then I will just use the IDE itself to do the quick fix at the required properties. And let me do the same here for the, so let me just type in the name, and then the parameters, and those are basically the parameters that I have specified on my module. So if I look at my module, I have a parameter name, I have a parameter location, and I have a parameter environment. It's not showing me the location parameter because the location parameter itself has a default value, so it's not required to supply. But as you can see as well, the same linter error comes up again. Okay, it's a best practice for behavior-wise to also specify the location. So let me just specify location here as well. You see the intelligence from the ID already coming in. And let me give it an environment. So I also specified allowed values on this parameter. So the IDE helps me also with which values can you use. So let me just use test and location. Just type 0. The good thing now is that I can use multiple modules in this file, or I can also use different resource groups. So for example, if I would say target scope, description, already see this red line, and I would also create RG resource group. RG, just use some little things. So, and I can also scope this part to my RG. You can see here very easily that I have specified a storage account somewhere with all the correct rules and everything else that needs to be configured on a storage account. And I then in a main template construct that as a complete template together with my resource group, making this ready to deploy. So if I would do a Bicep build on this file as well, so it's a Bicep. Oh, let me save it first because otherwise it will not construct a template. And then I will have the storage.json. So what you can see here as well, so I have those multiple resources. So I have one resource that's basically the resource group, and then I have a nested deployment like I mentioned before. So what you can see here as well is that if you paid attention to the Bicep file, I have specified the name, deployment name on that specific module. So it's not the name for the storage account I will be creating. No, it's the name for the nested deployment. That's basically also what you see happening in the ARM template. The resources/deployments part will have the deployment name as the name for itself. So what will also happen when deploying this to the Azure portal, it will show the name, deployment name for the deployment. So you will not be seeing a long string with an identifier. Now you will see a deployment name. So basically that part is modules, but there's also another thing about the modules. If we go to demo 002 and the Bicep, in the modules part, and that's basically the good thing, you also have module registries. So basically not sharing your ARM templates anymore in the storage account. Now you're able to share your templates in another place that you can use. So you could use a container registry or you could use a template spec. And the good thing about that is that these resources all live in Azure. meaning that you will also have all Azure functionality, meaning that you have role-based access control on those items. So if I do not have read writes on, for example, an Azure template spec, I will not be able to use that module of Bicep in my Bicep file. And the same applies to the container registry. The Bicep team is now also working on a public repository, meaning that they will have some repositories, modules in there that everyone can use. But that's more or less a real public one, and where you see that the container registry and the template spec are more used as an internal one for organizations. To show you the difference between those two is that on this side, I'm using a public module, and that's basically also a different reference to a specific file. The same applies for a template spec. You use specific aliases to point to a specific file that's in the cloud, and the same for a container registry. So if we look, for example, take the AZ temp spec automation account that is a template spec in my Azure platform, I can also look at the template spec itself by going to the Azure portal and then the AZ temp spec automation account. So basically, for the people that do not know what an Azure template spec is, an Azure template spec is just a template in the Azure portal that you can use to deploy resources. So what you can see is that I also have a deploy button here to directly deploy this template from the Azure portal. So if we open the template spec open, you can see that it's just a main template and that it's just an ARM template. And this ARM template can be used in Bicep as a module. So this could be a very large template in Azure that I just supply with 3 parameters and then deploy to the Azure platform. So making it very easy for you to just reuse templates, but also share templates within your organization, so that everyone is able to use specific templates, and that you can, for example, create something like certified services that we sometimes do for large enterprise customers. We deploy certified service to the Azure platform as template specs, and everybody is able to use them in their infrastructure as code to deploy those resources. And all those resources comply to the specific organization standards, making it really secure. Together with those aliases, and you may saw that in the bicep.config file as well, those module aliases are configured in the bicep.config. So you can see here that I have the alias sponsor registry, and that's basically pointing to my cloud registry, my template spec. This is also where basically we saw the comments for the CLI. So we had the Bicep build, we had that decompile, and we had that restore and publish. That restore and publish basically come in with together with the container registry. So the Bicep publish minus target will basically publish your module file, so your Bicep file, to a container registry that you specify. Basically, Bicep restore will restore it on your local system. So how it basically works at the moment that you are specifying that module, Bicep itself will retrieve that module from the cloud for basically from your location, and will also give you the intelligence that you are expecting from the module. So if I would go back to this module and I would just remove location, no, it's not required. So let me just remove this one. See the red line coming into parameters, and you also see that it's missing required properties. So underneath the hood, it is retrieving that module from the Azure cloud. It's placing it in cache on your local file system for you to be able to have that intelligence that you want in a specific IDE, so that you can create good resources and not, well on deploy time, getting into errors as well. A few other things I want to show is basically a very good way in doing multiple things for multiple times. So having, for example, a for loop in your items. So if I would specify an array of items, so in this example, I have an array as a parameter called VM items. and I want to deploy a VM for all those items. So what you can see here is that I just place a for loop in here, just next to the equal sign, and it will just loop through all the items that I have in VM items and deploy a specific VM for that. Meaning that you can very easily, very quickly create specific VMs. So if we would look at the deployment command, so I think it's this one, yeah. Don't remind that secure string because I remove all services after it as well. But what you can see here is that I'm specifying an array called VM items, wherein I will have 3 VMs. And I'm also in this PowerShell comment just referring to the Bicep file. So I'm just referring to the Bicep file, so I will let the deploy comment create everything itself. So if I would just, I think I have the good set. So let me just run this selection. Hope I'm still signed in as well. You will see in the Azure portal 3 VMs created because I've specified that for loop as well. Ooh. Okay, now it's just seeing that the error, yep, I've specified it as an error. That's a good thing. So because of the reason that I make the location as an error, we have a location parameter in here as well. Just retry that selection. You really see that all changes you make through the Bicep config will directly go to everything else you are doing in that template. Another cool thing to show you is basically conditions. So you can have multiple conditions in a file. So for example, if you would have a bool parameter or a specific condition in your file. So what you can see here is I have a specific function where I just type if my environment, then I'm specifying as a parameter in my deployment is equal to prod. If it's equal to prod, I will deploy this functionality zone redundant. If this environment is not equal to prod, I do not really need that zone redundant for this functionality, so I will specify this false. You also may notice another thing that is specified here is that I have a variable called environments, and that's of a type object. And that's basically a cool thing to do, and it's basically also a cool thing for basically people that are using your templates to make it very easy for them. So what you see here is I have a variable called environments, and that's just of a type object. In here I have specified the specific SKUs of this elastic pool, because I know when I'm deploying production, I want a premium pool. When I'm deploying a demo environment, I just want the standard, and the same for test and acceptance, for example. So people only need to tell me, okay, what kind of environment are you deploying? Are you deploying ACC, demo, prod, or test? And then I know, okay, you're deploying a test environment. I just need that SKU. So it's meant very easy for people using my templates and deploying them to the platform as well. So if we just go back to the slide and just look at the feature slide, I think we have managed everything that's basically in here. So there are already a lot of features that we discussed, a lot of features that are in Bicep at this moment. And Bicep isn't that old yet. And what you see here as well is that they have a monthly release cadence. So the next release of Bicep is basically done today. There are not a lot of new features in there, but more or less bug fixes as well. But they are working actively on new functionality for Bicep. So if you want to know more about basically what's coming, what's being created, also by maybe delivering your ideas to the team as well, just join the community calls that you can find on the GitHub page. So they have a specific GitHub page for Bicep. That's github.com/azure/bicep. You can file your issues there, but you can also find information on the community call to really get into what Bicep is, how you can help in making Bicep better itself as well. Docs.microsoft.com also has a lot of components on getting started with Bicep, learning how what you need to do and how you need to do it. Everything you saw during the demonstration is on my personal GitHub page. So that's github.com/Mike van der Graag/Bicep. And there's also something called like the Bicep Playground. And that's basically a small demo environment where on the left side you would have Bicep, on the right side you would have ARM. And basically everything you type on the right side on the left side will show up on the left side as well, making sure that you are basically totally in sync as well. Basically, that leaves me in thanking you for being at my session. So if you would like to get in contact, these are my contact options. So you can look at my website, on my GitHub, Twitter. I really don't mind. Just send me an email if you have specific questions. And maybe there are already specific questions from the community.
All right, thank you, Mike, for the presentation and showing the demo. There was quick question, but it was addressed there on the chat. Somebody, Richard actually asked, what are the REST clients? He didn't know that concept, but he got the answer there. Other than that, I would like to thank everyone joining our session today. It was all about infrastructure as code, how to do that on Azure, and how you can use Azure Bicep features to accomplish your um, deployments and management of digital resources, cloud resources in Azure environment. Again, thank you everyone. Thank you, Mike. I will just say that if you wanna go ahead and check up the code and look into the resources that Mike shared, here's his information, his website, Twitter, and GitHub repo. So go and check that so that you can have access and play on your own. Other than that, I will just share back again a QR code that we had regarding the Bicep and ARM learning modules that you can get from Microsoft Learn. They are here, so you can use QCR code or the URL. And again, thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Mike, for the session. I don't see any questions on the chat. It's mostly praises for putting a nice session here and demoing it. And thank you for the wonderful presentation.
Yeah,
That's all
thank you
my
for having me.
end. Thank you everyone again for joining. We are waiting you for the next session. Take care and see you next time.
See you. Bye
Bye for
bye.
now. Yep.